Tonight, another powerful cabinet minister calls it quits over the way the Trudeau government has handled itself. Jane Philpott sides with Jody Wilson-Raybould.
You're part of treaty, and you don't necessarily always think about it that way. So that, for me, was a really great sort of dawning moment of, I haven't thought about it like that before.
The Department of Fisheries and Oceans takes some time to learn what a nation-to-nation relationship means. And the FBI is trying to figure out how to repatriate masses of human remains years after being seized from the home of a missionary in his 90s. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Some breaking news from Ottawa. Another powerful figure in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's cabinet has resigned. Jane Philpott quit her new job as president of the Treasury Board and Minister of Digital Government this afternoon amid the ongoing SNC-Lavalin scandal. Philpott posted her resignation letter to the Prime Minister online. The letter says, and quote, "I have been considering the events that have shaken the federal government in recent weeks, and after serious reflection, I have concluded that I must resign as a member of cabinet." She went on to say, "Sadly, I have lost confidence in how the government has dealt with this matter and in how it has responded to the issues raised." Philpott's resignation follows damning testimony from Jody Wilson-Raybould last week. Wilson-Raybould resigned just days before she told the Justice Committee that she was being pressured by the Prime Minister's office to interfere with the SNC-Lavalin case. Philpott was previously Minister of Health and Indigenous Services before a cabinet shuffle in January. That shuffle sent her to the Treasury Board and Wilson-Raybould from Attorney General to Veterans Affairs, which sparked speculation that something had gone sour between the PMO and Wilson-Raybould, and she was being demoted. Philpott says she will continue to serve as a Liberal MP in Ontario. Meanwhile, Raybould plans to continue to serve as a Liberal MP in BC. With more on Jane Philpott's resignation this afternoon and what it means, we are joined by APTN National News reporter Justin Brake from Ottawa. So, Justin, it seems like this came out of nowhere today, but in her resignation, she made it pretty clear that she'd been thinking about this, as is Minister Philpott, since last week. What sticks out to you in her letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Well, there's several things in the letter that stick out. She says early on in her letter that the events in the recent weeks have shaken the federal government. There's kind of in the wake of Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony last week, there's an obvious effort by politicians and government officials and the Prime Minister himself to sort of counter Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony and to kind of downplay the significance of it, even though former Minister Wilson-Raybould said that she was protecting the integrity of the justice system. And former Minister Philpott, said that in her letter too. She talked about the fact that the integrity of the justice system is at stake. She said that as a member of cabinet, she didn't feel that she could uphold the Convention of Cabinet Solidarity, meaning that she didn't feel right to defending other ministers publicly and always kind of agreeing to, supporting the party and cabinet's positions on policy issues. She said it became untenable for her to continue to serve as minister. The other thing that kind of stood out to me is that she's taking a very principled stand, and she even says in her letter that there can be a cost to acting on one's principles, but there's a bigger cost to abandoning them. So it feels like we're seeing Philpott fall in line with the sort of the rationale that Jody Wilson-Raybould used in her testimony, and which members of the public, including Liberal Party supporters, seem to really support, which is a very moral, ethical stand on how politics should be done in the country. So this is pretty significant. That's what stood out most to me in her letter. Yeah, I mean, some of the language was very similar to what Jody Wilson-Raybould had said last week too. You were in an availability today with Minister Philpott, or former Minister Philpott, this morning. Let's take a look at a clip. This is just hours before she resigns.
Be a time when one could interfere, an Attorney General could interfere in a criminal case. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and also whether or not the last few days you've had an opportunity to speak to Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould, how she is doing.
So I'm here today to celebrate AI Day, and I'm not going to be taking questions on those issues. Thanks. You have shown support in the past to Jody Wilson-Raybould as you have been working with her a lot on some files. Do you think she should stay in the Liberal caucus?
As I said, I am here to celebrate AI Day, and si vous avez des questions au sujet de l'intelligence artificielle, je vais répondre.
Minister Philpott, that's the line we got on Friday from ministers saying it was about child welfare. Is it always going to be about something else? This is a fundamental challenge. We've had an Attorney General who said the integrity of the justice system was being challenged, which affects all Canadians.
I encourage you to speak to my staff about a more appropriate opportunity at an appropriate time.
Will you make yourself available to us in the next few days?
I will make myself available in a coming date. Today I'm here to celebrate our directive and artificial intelligence.
So that was this morning. What was your feeling as you watched her at that presser?
Some of the reporters there were interested in talking to her about the event that she had, which had to do with artificial intelligence. But however, there were a few reporters that continued to ask questions, as reporters have over the recent days and weeks, about the SNC-Lavalin controversy and about Jody Wilson-Raybould. And what was interesting was that former Minister Philpott, in her response, used the same talking points, the same line that other ministers did last Friday at the government's child welfare legislation announcement, and that is that today is about the issue that we're here to speak about. As reporters, you shouldn't be asking about Jody Wilson-Raybould and SNC-Lavalin at this time. But when she said it, she was clearly uncomfortable, and I got a weird sense just by her facial expressions at the time that maybe perhaps she was being made to say those lines and not address the issues. And now, of course, a few hours later, we see her resignation letter, and it's clear that that was weighing heavily on her mind.
Are there any rumblings on the Hill at this point that the dominoes are going to keep falling for the Liberal Party?
Well, we haven't heard much yet because this announcement just happened, but I mean that has been one of the big questions of speculation in recent weeks, is what kind of impact is the resignation of Jody Wilson-Raybould going to have. Now we know when the former Minister and Attorney General Wilson-Raybould, when the news broke of this story early in February and then following her resignation, there were a few people within the Liberal caucus that spoke out in support of her, not directly addressing too many issues, just kind of putting out some messages on social media. Jane Philpott was one of those people, and she's also regarded by many in the Indigenous community, but also by many Canadians, Liberal supporters and non-Liberal supporters, and other party supporters, as a favorite in terms of cabinet ministers. She's very well liked. She has done a good job on the files that she's been assigned to. So this could be very, very significant in terms of whether or not other cabinet ministers and other people within the Liberal Party decide to kind of continue those talking points of, trying to downplay the SNC-Lavalin controversy and Jody Wilson-Raybould, or whether they start to speak out or not be able to maintain their position within the party or within cabinet because of a felt moral obligation to do otherwise.
Well, we will keep watching this. Doesn't look like it's wrapping up anytime soon. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you.
Meanwhile, Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer reiterated his call for the Prime Minister to resign. Scheer, reacting to the resignation of Jane Philpott, says that Trudeau has lost the moral authority to govern.
Jane Philpott's resignation from Cabinet clearly demonstrates a government in total chaos, led by a disgraced Prime Minister, consumed with scandal and focused only on his political survival. It's time for every Liberal cabinet minister to ask themselves the same question Jane Philpott did. Is this what you got into politics for? To prop up a Prime Minister who will subvert the law to win elections and benefit his friends? If not, it's time for them to stand up and be heard, like Jane Philpott did today.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh tweeted that Philpott's resignation, quote, underscores the need for a public inquiry now more than ever. Singh says the resignation raises serious questions about Trudeau's, quote, interference and the LPC government's commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous people. It's time for us to take a quick break, but when we come back, the FBI is working with hundreds of tribes in the U.S. to repatriate Indigenous remains found at a collector's makeshift museum. First, here's tomorrow's weather forecast. On the East Coast, we have 4 in St. John's, -1 and sunny in Halifax. Cartwright 0 with sleet. Happy Valley Goose Bay -7 and snow. Chibougamau is -13 and snow. Gasp is -3 and sunshine. Ottawa, cloud, fittingly, -11, -8 and snow in Toronto. -15s for Big Trout Lake and Sioux Lookout, snow there. -14 and sunshine in Thompson, -12 and sunny in God's Lake. -10s with a mix of sun and cloud in Winnipeg, -9 for Brandon and Dauphin. -12 in Saskatoon, -11 in Regina, sunshine in southern Saskatchewan. -15 and sunny in Uranium City, -14s for Stony Rapids, La Ronge, Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. Cat Lake First Nation will be getting some new houses for families living in mold-infested homes. It's part of a new interim agreement with the federal government, but as Willow Fiddler reports, the province has yet to make any commitments to help.
The member of provincial parliament for Cat Lake First Nation continues to call on the province to assist with the community's housing crisis.
Chief Kiwagabo has requested for 10 to 14 housing units so that residents be removed from the contaminated houses. Last week, this government claimed that funded an infectious disease specialist to conduct a full medical assessment of the community, and that additional nurses have been deployed in the community. I spoke with the chief. Medical specialists were sent, but by the federal government. And there are no additional nurses.
In February, Cat Lake reached an interim agreement with Indigenous Services about a month after they declared a state of emergency over mold-infested homes.
When a social emergency is declared, the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs plays a coordinating role in efficiently responding to these emergencies. And, Speaker, we do know that while the provision of housing on reserves remains the responsibility of the federal government, we have reached out to the community to offer Ontario's full support.
But it's not clear what that support means. More than 100 houses in Cat Lake were inspected late last year, and in early January, mold in homes were believed to be the cause of severe health problems for many people in the community. In February, Mamaquah and NDP MP Charlie Angus visited Cat Lake and immediately called for a full medical assessment of the community. Indigenous Services says they're waiting for reports from epidemiology and respiratory specialists who were there last month. Mamaquah says the province and feds need to work together to make sure the community has access to medical specialists.
Will this government stop playing games with the lives and the health of children and families of Cat Lake and send up the emergency health team to the community so desperately it needs now?
The community is set to receive materials to build 15 new houses, repair 21 existing homes, and 10 portable housing units are to be installed while the Winter Road is still open. The Minister of Indigenous Services is expected in Cat Lake First Nation this week to sign the agreement. Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
Off to the East Coast, we've got the Department of Fisheries and Oceans reached out to the Mi'kmaq community to build better relationships, the first of its kind in Atlantic Canada. The event is called Indigenous Perceptions. It was about sharing truth and history. The DFO says it's one of many steps towards reconciliation. Angel Moore has this story.
DFO employees listened and had discussions with Mi'kmaq community members during a 3-day session. The idea is to improve understanding and communication on both sides. Elder Noel Millier says the ultimate goal is to change perceptions.
And so when we try to look at the parallels that both of those have, we come to understand a little bit about why we are the way we are on both sides. Why is there so much racism and why is there so much systemic trauma?
History was discussed as a shared history between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Trevor Senapass says it's the responsibility of everyone to educate themselves and others.
You know, treaties were signed by two parties, so the treaty is not just the Aboriginal treaty, it's by all. It's their ancestors and our ancestors signed these agreements.
The DFO wants their staff to become aware and more comfortable and have a good understanding of Indigenous history. Debbie Buitt-Matheson says this will help everyday interactions and perceptions.
You're part of treaty, and you don't necessarily always think about it that way. So that for me was a really great sort of dawning moment of, I haven't thought about it like that before, and I have to think about it like that.
Relationships are already improving with the DFO reaching out to the community.
Hopefully it will make a difference in building relationships, meaningful relationships with them in how they engage our First Nation communities.
Senapass gives the DFO credit for taking the step to learn from community members.
And what better way of doing it is really having First Nations people, elders, educators, leaders, and share this information, not just from our own people, but to others as well.
The DFO plans to offer more staff learning opportunities to develop positive relationships with Indigenous communities. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Halifax.
It's time for us to take another quick break, but we've got more news to come, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. To northern Alberta, we have -14 in sunshine in Fort McMurray, -12 in sunny in Grand Prairie, -10 for Edmonton, -7 for Calgary, sunshine, 1 for Kamloops, -3 for Quesnel, -8 and snow in Fort Nelson, -1 sunshine in Smithers, -13s for Mayo and Dawson, clear skies up there, -8 in Whitehorse, -9 and sunny in Norman Wells, -14 and sunshine in Yellowknife. Tuck is in at -13 and sunny, Sax Harbor, clear skies, -14. Clear in Cambridge Bay, -19. Arviat's in at -21 with clear skies. Royal Cove, -24. Clyde River and Pangerton, -19. -19 as well in Cape Dorset, -23. Mostly sunny skies up in Arctic Bay. Welcome back. It was international news last week. Don Miller was a 91-year-old Indiana man who had spent his life traveling the globe collecting artifacts and antiquities, including many that were illegal to possess. He died in 2015 as authorities were combing through his farmhouse, which he'd turned into a veritable museum. Among the items on display, some 2,000 bones belonging to approximately 500 humans. The FBI believed those were dug up from Indigenous burial grounds, and they're trying to get the bones back to the tribes from where they were stolen. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is FBI Special Agent Tim Carpenter, who heads up the investigation. So how and when did the FBI become involved in this collection of this Don Miller in Indiana?
The FBI first received a tip on this case in late 2013.
And so he was still alive at that point, is that correct?
He was, yep.
And was he, when you guys approached him, was there any indication from him that he was interested in repatriating these remains to the rightful resting place?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, from our earliest conversations with Don, he kind of understood the gravity of the situation. He was very cooperative throughout the course of the investigation, as I stated publicly. We had a very cooperative relationship with him, and, you know, it's my belief, my fundamental belief, that he, at the end, he wanted to see not only all the ancestral remains that we recovered, but all of the objects and the various artifacts from different cultural groups that he had. He wanted to see those objects returned home.
And why would somebody want to collect things? I mean, he had a lot of other things. He had, artifacts from the Ming Dynasty and whatnot. I can see some of the art and that sort of thing. But to be digging up human remains, why are people interested in that?
Well, the truth is, I'm not sure. So, I mean, Don was passionate about his collection and the type of activities that he was doing and that he engaged in. And I think in this instance, in this case, his passions kind of ran away with him a little bit. We all know that collecting certain types of materials, whether it's cultural property or if it's just collectibles or whatnot, clearly there are legal means to do that kind of activity, and then, in certain cases, they tend to cross the line. And I think in this case, Don, his passions got ahead of him, and he kind of crossed the line in certain aspects.
Well, I mean, I guess if people can get excited about collecting stamps, you could get excited about collecting bones. So what are the tribes that the FBI is working with now? How did you identify which communities to get in touch with in terms of returning the bones?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's an ongoing process. I would guess I'd start with saying that we're still trying to communicate with all of the tribes that we need to. And I think, if the number of my numbers right now, I think we're up to, 573 federally recognized tribes, and then quite many more non-recognized or state-recognized tribes. So when the case first developed, I think once I kind of got my head wrapped around the scope and the size of the collection, it was very clear from the outset that, look, we're going to need a lot of help. Yeah. This is not something that we have organic expertise in to the lengths that we would need that expertise to identify all of these disparate pieces from all of the different corners of the country. And then, then you include the international stuff in as well from every corner of the globe. So I think one thing that we did early that was maybe unprecedented, particularly for the FBI, is that we engaged with the tribes from minute one. Now, a problem with that is, of course, I don't necessarily know who to contact and who to talk to at each tribe. So we started the old-fashioned way, if you will. We just started by sending out letters. So we sent hard letters to every federally recognized tribe in the United States. We followed with emails, and then just quite a bit of word of mouth. We just asked folks to get the word out, and we started having national teleconference calls with the tribe, just to kind of brief them. Here's the case that's under development, and that we are seeking help from the tribes to come in and not only help us identify the pieces, but maybe even more importantly, tell us what we shouldn't be doing. We were very cognizant that there were going to be cultural considerations that maybe we were ignorant of or that we hadn't fully considered, like treatment of ancestral remains. How do we do this with dignity? And, how do we collect the material, hold the material? How do we package it properly? And so we really wanted that advice and, expertise from the tribal communities at the earliest outsets of the case. And then as we were going, even while we were on site, we had some tribal representatives at the search site with us to advise us on the ground. Certainly we can't have tribal representatives from every nation there. We just can't do that. But we had some representation there. And then we were continuing to hold those national conference calls, even while we had boots on the ground out at Mr. Miller's property collecting material.
This is incredible. Just my last question for you. Are any of these artifacts, these bones, have they been individually marked as to where they may have come from or when?
Yeah, I won't go into great detail about that. We did have some indication on the remains, and, we've taken those lines of evidence and followed those logically as we could. But I will say that in most instances, unfortunately, we did not have that level of information.
Well, best of luck as you guys get these back to the rightful resting places, and thanks again for taking time to join us today.
All right, thank you.
That story's got the makings of a Hollywood blockbuster. That is your news for this Monday. If you missed anything and you want to catch up, you can always visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Melissa Ridgen, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.